Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars.
SoundCartel.
From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. In many ways, UGC, or user-generated content, is like word of mouth on speed, the holy grail for any business, so long as the message is positive, of course. James Smith, CEO of digital agency Smith Brothers Media, says it's not just reach that expands, but the flexibility of messaging that gets tailored by each individual promoting your product or service. I begin by asking James for his take on user-generated content and who exactly is producing it.
It's exactly what it says on the tin. It's users making it, it's candid, it's authentic. It's quite often created by customers, brand loyalists, and even employees as well.
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, I've actually fallen down the TikTok rabbit hole, and the amount of influencer marketing I watch and actually enjoy and learn from is astounding. So why is user-generated content important?
So it serves several different purposes. It can cut through so many different barriers which other marketing just cannot do. So first of all, it's incredibly authentic. In fact, you cannot get more authentic than a user pointing a camera at themselves and talking about a product or an experience or whatever it might be. It really does help establish a true, candid brand loyalty, and it really helps grow the community. So one of the fascinating things about user-generated content is it actually creates what I would describe sometimes as micro-influencers. So as soon as someone creates content and shares it, even if it's just to their own personal network, that is a form of influencer marketing. And if brands and businesses are able to encourage users to create this content, it's a fantastic way to suddenly multiply the reach of the product or the value that you're providing. The other thing as well, interesting stat, 92% of people will buy something if it's been recommended to them by a friend.
Yeah.
And when I say recommended by a friend these days is no longer just your friend who you see at work. It is your friend on Facebook or Instagram. And we do each individually think that Kim Kardashian is our friend when we follow them. So when we see things that are created, this user-generated content created by these people that we follow, aka our friends, that in turn allows us or encourages us to buy from those businesses and those brands.
Well, it's that word of mouth, James. It's the holy grail for all brands is to have people talking about their product or service in positive ways to other people. I mean, that's the goal of all marketing, I would suggest. And perhaps that's why brands are getting more and more involved with user-generated content, because it's people talking to each other, not the brand. And in general, people trust brands a lot less than they trust themselves, their peers, their colleagues.
So very true. So very true. I think that also allows it to become more adaptable and flexible because quite often a brand has got their brand strategy, their go-to-market strategy, and they have their key messages for the benefits or the features of a product. But all of a sudden you can start hitting different angles and different points because, the features, the benefits to an individual person is going to be very different.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you can end up with this fantastic array of really good key messages, which is all being put out by your fans effectively.
So do you have any standout examples of user-generated content? Who do you think is doing it best?
On a global scale, for those creatives out there, Adobe do a really good job at this. They've got their Adobe Perspective hashtag and they encourage people to create content and share it. But probably on a more national level for the Australian listeners, Tourism Queensland did a fantastic piece encouraging people to send in a video application of becoming a caretaker for some islands.
Yeah.
And through that, they got so much content that could then not only be used for user-generated content that people were posting and sharing, but also for future advertising as well.
Yeah, and I think that idea of making the content as simple and easy as possible for people to produce is a really key factor in trying to encourage user-generated content. And that's something that a particular campaign, Best Job in the World, I think it was, managed to do. Is there an example of user-generated content gone wrong?
There are several.
So many.
So many. I think one of my favourites when I say favourites for the reason it went wrong, was an example of a big brand not aware of the content that could potentially come out, and so went a little bit too broad in their approach to trying to create user-generated content. Now, that was our good friends at McDonald's. So they came up with the campaign McD Stories. So the idea was they wanted people to share stories about their restaurants, their visits, and their experiences. And we all know that sometimes experiences aren't always positive, and unfortunately, in these cases, it was the negative experience that got shared, and it went horrifically wrong. So I think one of the key takeaways from that for organisations is just to be aware of your audience, be aware of your product, and encourage user-generated content that is going to be fixated around some positivity rather than danger of negative feedback.
What were some of the comments that were put up by people?
I think there were some good comparisons between the advertising material and the actual material that was received. I think that was probably the one that was shared the most.
Yeah, so much smaller burgers than what the pictures portray. And,
indeed.
Perhaps some hairs in food and different...
Yeah, some rather gross content, to be honest.
Well, let's move on. For small to medium businesses who can't afford to pay the Kardashians millions of dollars to promote their product or service, what tips do you have to start or strengthen their user-generated marketing game?
So first of all, know your audience. Do your research. Understand where they're interested, what they like to share. One of the good things about user-generated content is you give people an excuse to create content that they enjoy and that their followers will enjoy. So knowing your audience is key. Obviously, without having millions of dollars of budget to pay influencers to create that content, one of the clever ways of doing it is to entice. And there's a couple of really good examples of organisations that have done that. And it might be for either a discount or it might be for a competition entry. And that can be a very clever way to encourage people to create that user-generated content. So if you haven't tried it yet, find your angle, know your customers, and come up with either a competition or a giveaway or some sort of incentive for people to create their own content.
That was James Smith, CEO at Smith Brothers Media. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow at BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.